Recording in progress. Thank you, recording lady. And welcome to our talk tonight, Uranus, the constant of change. My name is Eric Myers. And I did this talk back in 2008 in Denver, Colorado at the UAC Astrology Conference. And it was very interesting for me to go back and look at this PowerPoint presentation because I had all these memories of what was going on in 2008, which I don't generally think about on most days. And just thinking about the state of the world in 2008, because we're talking about Uranus, which has to do with the constant of change, the churning wheels of evolution that go on and on. And I was thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, back in 2008, I don't think really there was Facebook or many people on it. It might have been invented, but I think I joined around 2010 or 11, and I think most people it gathered steam more around that time and beyond. So even like social media really wasn't the big thing. And I remember 2008, people weren't really generally carrying, cell phones, especially not smartphones. And there was not too much discussion about trans rights or things of this nature. Donald Trump was really not in the news at all in 2008. And I was just thinking a lot of what's going on today, there was no AI talk. People weren't putting up images, of themselves in phenomenal, fantastic kind of outfits or what have you. And so it was kind of fun to think, a lot has shifted and changed. And here we are talking about the constant of change, which is Uranus. So let's get into this talk. Just a couple things about me. Um, I got my master's at Naropa in Boulder, transpersonal counseling psychology, BA psychology at American. Studied with Stephen Forrest like 20 something years ago. A few of the books I've written are listed there. The last one was the Beatles book that Sue here edited. An Astrology of Awakening, Volume 1 and 2, Elements and Evolution, and my Uranus book. And then my website is Soul Vision Consulting, and my email, Eric at Soul Vision Consulting. Okay, so what we're going to do today is just give some info on Uranus and the way that the book I wrote, Uranus, the Constant of Change, is organized. It looks at the planet from just different angles, looking at it from information, some background as I'm presenting, but then mainly looking at it from an individual level, looking at it at more of a social level, collective level, and more of a transpersonal level. And so we're going to do a little bit of that today, time dependent, contingent. We'll see how it goes. I am presenting late on the East Coast here, and I'm tired, so I don't know how much steam I've got for a really long talk today, but we'll at least go for an hour, and then we'll see how that goes. One of the charts we are going to look at is the discovery chart, and I mentioned that first. It was discovered on March 13th, 1781 by Abraham Herschel. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So Uranus orbits 1,784 miles away from the sun, which is pretty far. But Pluto's like, what, 3 billion miles away or something like that. So solar system's pretty big, pretty big. 84 years for it to get around the sun. One of the most distinguishing characteristics is its 98-degree tilt, and then it points to the sun. So it's on its side. And in mythology, Uranus is the father of Kronos, Saturn, the husband to Gaia. And so we see that hierarchical nature with these planetary lineup with fathers and sons and whatnot, which makes sense. Uranus, the sky god, the about the metaphysical, and then coming in, you've got Saturn, Kronos, with the physical that's enveloped within that. But Saturn pulls out his big weapon there. Oops. I don't know how to go backwards. Oh, there we go. And he it gets castrated. And so we're going to talk about the mythic castration. In fact, the line that I said to open up this talk at UAC in 2008, I had everyone gathered, and the first thing I said was, "Who's ready for testicle reattachment surgery?" That's what I said, which was my way of saying we are going to get the balls back onto Uranus. And yeah, I kind of think of that as almost like my personal mission with my chart and what this planet means to me. Let's honor it more. Let's bring it in. We don't need to remove it, with what's happened with the dualistic Saturnian relative world. Let's reattach the balls and have this thing have potency again, and the transpersonal, vitality. Um, but the severed genitals, of course, famously were thrown in the ocean and became Aphrodite, Venus. Venus on a half shell. You know, Botticelli. Showing that image. Um, that's birth from Uranus. So there we see the creativity and beauty, Venus, that can come from this planet with the golden mean and other kind of the beauty of nature, the intelligence, Uranus, that we see in nature can be found in that part of the mythology of giving birth to Venus. Also associated with Prometheus, Rick Tarnas's book about Prometheus is well worth reading, and more info about that. And I do agree with what Tarnas says, and which makes sense with Uranus because it's about multidimensional things, paradox. That's saying that truth isn't so black and white and linear. When you get out to Uranus, things become multidimensional. So why not have Prometheus really involved with Uranus uh, as well? Okay, so let's keep it going. Just some basic keywords you might hear about it: liberation, progress, breakthroughs, metaphysics, revolutions, deconditioning, innovation. There's the multidimensional stuff, psychicness, synchronicities, the overarching intelligence of nature. Lightning bolts are famous association with Uranus, that eureka moment, the synchronistic experience, like a lightning bolt, boom, everything is connected. We're all nerve endings in a really large brain, is Uranus. I also discuss it as the cool planet in the book. And what do I mean by that? Well, there's different ways that we can be cool. You could be neutral and dispassionate, non attached, witnessing, like watching something behind sunglasses, that kind of idea, the rebel, the outsider, which is in contrast to being hot headed. Uranus is cool, it's neutral. It doesn't get excitable. It is what it is, neutral. Um, it's also cool to be humanitarian and recycle and volunteer your time and act selflessly and anonymously. That's pretty cool. Somebody donates to some charity and they don't want credit for it. Hey, that's pretty cool, man. So humanitarian things are cool, like Uranus. And then things that are fascinating or cool, like technology and anything far out, man. Anything new and innovative is cool. Uranus is also associated with those things that are pretty cool, like new gadgets. And then when you're in high school, it's pretty cool, man. When you break the rules, have a cigarette or whatever. Revolutions are cool. Any shock to the system, man, we're going to go mess them up. Uranus is involved with that type of cool too. And then even the color is cool. That nice, cool blue. Even lightning, I just mentioned, is cool. So I think of Uranus as the cool planet for what it's worth. Okay, so let's get into the discovery chart. Um, so this is such a cool chart. We can spend a long time on this one. We're going to look at a lot of charts today. So I'm not going to be too verbose here, but I don't have the chart info with me right now. And the exact moment that Uranus discovered was not documented. It's estimated, this chart, but it has to be close. And how do we know it has to be close? Because the sun set not too soon before this chart. Here's the sun set already. The sun must be set, and also must be set to some degree to make the sky pretty dark. So I think this is chart for about 10:30 in London, where Herschel discovered it back in 1781. And then at this time, the moon was about to rise, and that would have made it more bright in the sky and added a distraction. And the moon was, still somewhat illuminated. It's past the full moon, but still it would be pretty bright up in the sky. So if we think before the moon rises and after the sunset, there's only about a half hour of time. So this is in that window. Okay, so let's get into this chart. Okay, so there's Uranus. Now, Uranus is in Gemini, and we're going to have a return not too far. Uranus will enter Gemini in 2025, in 2 years from now. So we'll have a return to this chart beginning then. But this is where it's interesting, is that there's Saturn, Kronos, with Mars, which is the weapon to castrate the father. So here's the opposition of Saturn holding the Sith or the dagger or whatever martial kind of weapon you want to think about it as, and in antagonistic opposition with Uranus, which is pretty interesting. Then we have the mythology of it. So the karma, the nodal axis, is a portrayal of the mythology. Because here we have the woundedness, Chiron, of the physical, Taurus, that's part of the nodal axis, castration. He's getting his balls chopped off. And then we've got the South Node in Scorpio, which can go with that type of bloody conflict that has this, wound that we're talking about. But what is really going on with this conflict? Well, Pluto is the ruler of the South Node in Scorpio, and here's Pluto in Aquarius in the third house. And so Uranus is about an idea. It's about the mental realm and the idea that the solar system is a whole lot different than we thought. It broke, all of history where we understood that Saturn was the outermost planet. Now we have to shift a new paradigm, Pluto in Aquarius, which of course, now Pluto's back in Aquarius, and we're going to have a Pluto return of this chart. And this is the first Pluto return since this chart, because Pluto takes 250 years. Let's go back. How do I go backwards? Oh, here we go. Nope. I'm sorry about this. Go ahead. All right, sorry about that. My presentation skipped forward on me, but we're back. So we were talking about the Pluto and Aquarius. We're going to have this Pluto return coming soon, while we're in transition of Pluto moving from Capricorn to Aquarius, as I'm presenting now in May of 2023. Pluto is in Aquarius, but it's about to go retrograde back to Capricorn. So that's the way it is. But so we have the idea. We have a paradigm shift. We're breaking the known going on here. And then we talked about Aphrodite coming up, bubbling up on, from the severed genitals. So here we have the severance going on with Pluto, the blood. We talked about the wound on the body. We talked about Saturn holding the weapon, and the whole thing is about how we understand things. And then the ruler of the North Node, what comes out of this is Venus in Pisces, just as depicted in the Botticelli in the ocean, bubbling up. And even the fourth house sounds like Pisces in the fourth house. Doesn't that sound like waves coming up on a beach kind of idea? Um, this is home, fourth house. Pisces is the ocean. And so here we see Venus emerging, ruler of the North Node. So we can bring the Uranian wound with Chiron into beautiful Venusian, uh, you know, discovery within nature. And then the other notable thing about this chart is the sun, which is square the Uranus and the Saturn Mars. And the sun is in Pisces here. And to me, this is quite interesting because to me, the sun is about awakening, and Pisces is towards the transpersonal and a spiritual and things, of course, that are beyond Saturn. And so, in order to mature and awaken into the promise of the sun, it's the mediator of the past with the future and resolving this mythic castration because ultimately we have to do all the planets and they all have to get along. And so the more that we can awaken into compassion, into a broader vision, into things that are more spiritual, because Uranus is about metaphysics and our own spiritual experiences, Pisces, then we can bring this understanding and this tension to greater resolution. Oh, the other thing I should have mentioned is the family dynamic between Saturn and Uranus. Well, the moon can go with family, and it's also in Scorpio, and it's not far from the South Node and probably the Ascendant. So there's the family strife depicted with the Scorpio moon going on as well. So I thought that this was a phenomenally accurate and illustrative chart of the mythology. So that's what I wanted to start with. So there's the depiction of the testicle, you know, severance. I forgot who the artist of this one is. It's been years, but I just thought I'd put a picture up of the mythic castration. So I guess this dude here must be Uranus and Saturn. Saturn's got a nice ass. All right, let's keep going. So let's get personal now with Uranus. What does it mean personally? Well, I would say points to um, you know the breakthrough of the self into a deeper self alignment, individuation. Because Saturn can be about cultural, social conditioning, and Uranus, in many ways, is about getting beyond the Saturnian kind of grind of separation consciousness and connecting in with the liberated, authentic, metaphysical truth. So let's decondition from all of that. However, there's also some other challenging facets, including trauma, which I find to be quite accurate. The more and more that I um, evolve as an astrologer, uh, Uranus does point to themes of trauma disconnection because here we have the castration. There's the trauma. We're being disconnected from something that needs to be reattached. So there is those themes. And I can say personally, I've got a lot of Uranian and Aquarian things in my chart, and there has been trauma and disconnection themes in my biography that I've been dealing with. So that's really how I work with a lot of clients. I don't jump to all of the glorious possibilities. I tend to look more initially at the issues that need to be addressed and resolved. And then if we can, then Uranus can point to superpowers, brilliance, broader collective humanitarian things, awakening, liberation and non-attachment from the physical manifest world, where we could be in the world but not of it, and be a bridge from the spiritual to the physical. We can heal that mythic castration and unite those realms. Okay, so we're going to spend a lot of time on charts and pointing out Uranus in different um, people's biographies. Um, so I selected several very notable Uranian people, and we're going to say a few things about their charts. So here's Galileo, and he's got Uranus and Sag down here in the fifth house, and Uranus is square his sun quite tightly, and is Mercury and Pluto to a lesser degree. But he certainly was a Uranian, shifting our understandings of science. Another thing, Uranus goes with science and things that are, about the interconnectedness of nature and its workings. But also Galileo with Uranus in Sagittarius. Obviously, he made groundbreaking work on the planet Jupiter, which is thematically aligned with Sagittarius. And so he had a philosophical Sagittarian Uranian contribution to his life force, to his sun there, but also Mercury. I mean, he was brilliant, and he was an intellectual innovator, of course. And then Galileo was famous for being a heretic, house arrest. His crime was looking up the truth, as the Indigo Girls like to sing about. So here we have the tension with others, with Pluto in the eighth and Venus in the eighth, around ideas, Mercury in the eighth, all of this in tension square with Uranus. So he's a good example of the heretic, of the innovator, the revolutionary. Uh, and so we see all of those things with Galileo. To me, he's pretty prototypically Uranian, and so you see, with the tightness of the Uranus Sun square. Okay, a very different version of a Uranian, Princess Diana. So she's the humanitarian in that face of Uranus, and she's got Uranus conjunct the North Node, and it also goes with that trauma. She's got Uranus, or she had Uranus opposed her moon in Aquarius. And I remember speaking about her eating disorder issues as a youngster, um, insecurity. Um, she was anxious. Uh, Moon in Aquarius opposed Uranus. And then she healed that and matured, and her ability to do the Leo North Node, regal, royal, princess, doing Uranian work as a royal person, one face of Leo, uh, as this humanitarian, of loving and being compassionate to others with her beautiful Cancer sun, because she's healing her own issues of disconnection and eating disorders and anxiety. And so it's actually an externalization of self love, which is why she was a Cancer. I'm a Cancer too. And a big part of my counseling and my work is about self love. So our own healing has a collective expression, which we see very beautifully with this chart. And then she's got Neptune in the 10th house, which is like an ambassador of compassion for landmine victims, for the disempowered, that type of thing. But she's no Galileo. Her job is to be a leonine representation of Uranus, as a celebrity, as a royal person. Okay, so another face of Uranus, the pioneer, Neil Armstrong, of course, the first person on the moon. And he's got Uranus in trailblazing Aries, which reflects that. This chart kind of blows me away, um, Armstrong, because um, outside of Uranus, well, which would say a few more things. I mean, he had a trine his Leo sun, and he did become a celebrity. with like Princess Diana. We got Leo energy with Uranus. Not all astronauts have become celebrities, only really a small handful, but everyone knows who he is because he was the first guy on the moon. So he became a Uranian celebrity, a breakthrough pioneer. But I like the moon stuff because he's got, get this, the moon is in Sag, long distance journeys, and it's a mutual reception with Jupiter in Cancer, reflecting this pretty much the same thing. So I thought that was pretty interesting. He's the first guy in the moon, and he's got a Sag moon and Jupiter in Cancer. So that's pretty interesting. Um, okay, you know what? Let's just go forward then. I think we said what we need to. My slide skipped again. It's very sensitive on my computer apparently. And let's I'll bring my hands away so it doesn't keep jumping. Uh, Another version of Uranus is the truth teller. Is Dr. Ruth was a truth teller. She's the sexpert that was most kind of active and famous, I believe, in the 1980s. She might have been around in the 70s as well, but she became much more of a celebrity in the 80s, I believe. Um, and she's this character. If people don't know her, she's very small, um, and mousy, and speaks with a funny way. But here she is talking about the most private and sensitive topics with a really hilarious kind of laugh and smile and an engaging persona, and just talking about things that most people are not comfortable talking about. Um, about sexual topics. So she's got Uranus, also square Mercury, same thing as Galileo, but it's a much different type of truth telling or Uranus Mercury person. And she's got it, of course, conjunct Mars, which can go with sexual desire. So here's that connected in with Uranus, and it's all being um, connected in with communication. And then she's got the Gemini, so she is to be a communicator, Gemini North Node as well. And that's what she was. She was a communicator of the taboo, Uranus. And Uranus, the most elevated planet. It's up in the 11th house, the world stage, the collective. So she was widely embraced by culture as a Uranian martial kind of, truth telling, kind of leader in that field. So I thought that was interesting. Okay. Another version of Uranus, Ellen DeGeneres, which I put in quotes, of course, the deviant, according to conventional society. Now, this is 2008. And even since then, in 15 years, there's been so much more widespread acceptance of homosexuality. Gay marriage was what, 2015 or something? Passed in, I think, around there. So this is, years before that. Ellen was apparently the first woman to kiss another woman on a television sitcom. So I think that's true. And maybe a few other notable firsts, bringing in alternative relational ways. So relational ways go with Venus. And she's got Venus in Aquarius, exactly opposite Uranus and Leo. Doesn't get too much tighter than that. And then she's got a whole other, kind of grand cross going on, tying all this stuff in. So she's got the Sun in Aquarius hanging out with the Venus and opposed to Uranus. Venus also rules the South Node in the 5th house of expression. And then the Scorpio North Node with a few other planets there does point to issues of intimacy, and the 11th house, again, bringing it to the world stage. So Uranus is involved with this huge kind of complex grand square thing going on. And she brought basically this idea of we can shift society to include other types of people. Venus, Sun in Aquarius, connected in with Uranus. So she very much led that. And speaking of leadership, Mars in the 1st house, and then doing it professionally with her career, Saturn also in the 1st. So there's been many other notable gay people who have made strides towards acceptance and normalization in society. So she's not the only one. So I don't want to give her too much credit here, but she is notable, I do think. And she, obviously had her own talk show, and she reached a level of fame that was pretty widespread. Okay. Another face of Uranus is, of course, the genius. And who better than Albert Einstein? And for those of you who are keeping track at home and are very observant, you might remember that the Uranus discovery chart had the sun at 23 degrees Pisces. And here's Uncle Albert Einstein, who's got his sun also at 23 degrees Pisces, which I found to be pretty interesting myself, because Einstein is pretty prototypically Uranian, even the way his hair looks like he put his finger in a socket, and he's like the Doc character from Back to the Future, is modeled after Einstein, so he kind of carries that. So what's going on with Uranus in his chart? Well, here it is in the third house of the mind, perfectly placed there. Now, one thing that I have noticed in my research is a lot of people make a big deal of Uranus in major aspect to Mercury. We looked at Galileo, and we looked at one other person, Dr. Ruth, Uranus, Mercury, and maybe one others, and a lot of attention can be made on the planetary exchange between Uranus and Mercury. But I found if you see Uranus in the third house, stand back. That is really potentially brilliant. You got to claim it. Another example is Magnus Carlsen, who is the chess champion, grandmaster for many years. His chart has Uranus in the third house as well. And that guy's pretty bright. And so is Einstein. But then check this out, the major aspect that Einstein has with his Uranus is this opposition to Jupiter in Aquarius, Uranus's sign. And the thing about Einstein is, yes, he was a physicist. Yes, he was excellent with mathematics. He needed to have that. But in history, Einstein is almost more universally known as kind of a mystical philosopher, and bringing a much broader, and he also had a Sag moon, bringing us a much broader, big picture conception, relativity, E equals MC square. Those are concepts that bring the mind to another paradigm and a broader philosophical Jupiter paradigm of understanding, especially in the ninth house of higher learning. So this aspect, this Uranus in Virgo, which is getting to the nuts and bolts of physics, connected in with a broader philosophical paradigm, is just such a gargantuan kind of opposition that changed the world. And I'm a huge fan of Einstein, if anyone knows me. And I do think that Einstein's intellectual contributions are probably the most important of any single person who's ever lived. And that's what he's got going on with his chart with Uranus. He's also got it square Pluto over the sign, a little loose, but still relevant. And Pluto in the 11th, changing the world. Neptune also is located in the 11th, just having an impact in the collective consciousness. And then in Taurus, grounding that to how we understand the physical world. And physics has to do with understanding that as well, physics. Okay, so there's Einstein. We got a lot we're going to get to, so let's keep it rolling. Another face of Uranus, the rebel. Rewind back to 1993, Waco, Texas, the Branch Dravidian cult that was in the news, and this cult leader, David Koresh, who was a Leo with Uranus conjunct his sun. And Leo's, of course, a fire sign. And what did he do? He burned down the building because he was a narcissistic cult leader. So he was doing more of the shadow of Leo and the shadow of Uranus. And that really is the variable, from my perspective, that many others share, is the variable of consciousness, or how mature somebody is not found in the chart. It's what we bring to the chart. So this guy, in my estimation, which could be wrong, but the way it appears to me, this is not the most conscious individual. He's doing more of the shadow. And that's why I included him, because to have the full spectrum, if we're going to talk about Einstein, well, life also exists, David Koresh's. So we got to, not just glorify our heroes, we got to look at some of our more seedy characters as well. They're part of life. Donald Trump's got Uranus conjunct his sun, and he's a Uranian too, and he's kind of a con artist, uh, and so is David Koresh, and that can be some of the shadow, the rule breaker, the rebel. I'm going to burn down the house, or I'm going to break laws, or I'm going to, you know, do whatever the heck I want to do. How do you like me now? So he's a good face of that more rebellious part of the archetype. Okay, so let's shift now, and from personal planets and charts to social things. Uranus does involve social revolution. It's part of our social dialogue as a progressive force, pushing the envelope. Breakthrough moments in history, defiance and demonstrations, the dawn of new eras, shocking occurrences, cultural developments, all have something to do with Uranus. And then, as I believe we're going to talk about, when it teams up with other planets with cycles, the Uranus Saturn cycle, Uranus Jupiter cycle, all of that is in my Uranus book, and I have some things to illustrate that. Okay, so some events that are particularly Uranian. The bombing of Hiroshima in Japan, August of 1945. When I saw this, astrology doesn't surprise me anymore, because it's always accurate. It's always valid. It never fails. It's got a perfect record. But it always puts a smile on my face when you see something that's so ridiculously um, representative of the event. A bomb coming from the sky. This is the moment that they released the bomb, Hiroshima, which was the first one before Nagasaki, and Uranus is that kind of nuclear explosion. Mars as a warhead, right on the midheaven. Look at Uranus at 16 Gemini. The midheaven is 16 Gemini. So here it is, the bomb, the Uranian explosion coming from the sky, making that big mushroom cloud. So I thought that was a pretty interesting thing to see. And then this Uranus Mars is connected in with the Sun Pluto conjunction. And in fact, some astute viewers might know that you have uranium and plutonium were the two bombs with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then at this time frame, you had Uranus and Pluto conjoined with the Sun and Mars in the sextile, literally bringing those planets with the atomic weaponry. And then the Leo is just how big it became famous and visible, and in the 11th house as a Plutonian event. Pluto in Leo, a big, enormous mushroom cloud that wiped out all these people. So Leo isn't always fun and games and juggling and Mick Jagger, who's a Leo. You connect it with Pluto, and you've got the dark, the destruction of vitality, Pluto and Leo, annihilation of warmth, and that positivity of Leo is getting really dark, connected in with this unrestrained, new nuclear innovative weaponry, Mars. So that's how you can see Hiroshima there, which is pretty striking in my view. And this is why astrology is so great, because you see Uranus doing something like this, but it's also connected in with Ellen DeGeneres in a different way. It's got so many different sides to it. So it's so do all these archetypes. They have so many different expressions with whatever signs and planets that are modifying them. So this is a pretty good example of that. All right, speaking of which, here's another different social event that was very Uranian. This was in August of 1963 when Martin Luther King got up on the Lincoln Memorial and he said, I've got a dream. And his dream was that we're all going to treat each other equally. So Uranus takes on social dimensions with Venus, just like with Ellen, but in a different way. And what is being revolutionized? Virgo. Virgo has connotations at times of inequality. Virgo can be power imbalances, um, where we have certain people that are more subjugated or downtrodden. The commoner, the disempowered can go with Virgo. So it's a revolution of the commoners or the downtrodden in order to rise up and claim power, Pluto, and the sun awakening this vision. So this is right when he was delivering these words, you know, in the 10th house. We have a social revolution of in order to correct a power imbalance, because master slave can go with Virgo or the 6th house. That is what is getting changed. So again, another really different, interesting face of Uranus going on here as well. Okay, yet again, I did this talk in 2008 when I made this, and just a couple years prior, of course, was Hurricane Katrina, which at the time was one of the biggest events. We've had a lot of other hurricanes since then that have become very noteworthy, and but this was really one of the big ones of the modern, devastating storms that are now more common. Uh, it's amazing that Katrina was now 18 years ago here in 2023. So here's Uranus in watery Pisces, hitting the land of the Virgo sun. So bringing this torrential, you know, kind of force that can't be contained, Uranus, another Uranian event that was highly disruptive, especially to the people in New Orleans and many others, because that hurricane was enormous and it did cover a big portion of the US. So another Uranian event, but again, I like to bring in differences. We have it in Pisces here, which brings in water, and it did come from the ocean. So that's interesting. Okay, we talked about Neil Armstrong before and his natal chart, but what about the moment when he got on the moon? So that's depicted here, another Uranian event. And so breakthrough Uranus of long distances, Jupiter to the moon, right there next to it. Can't get more literal than that. And then Uranus is also sextile Mars in Sag, also long distances. I wouldn't put too much emphasis on the house because it wasn't in any location on the Earth. Um, so I forgot what I used to cast this chart because you can't do an astrology program for a position on the moon, at least not yet. So I did cast it using our much more rudimentary, technology where it's only the Earth. So you got to do something. But that's why it's a breakthrough event to bring in issues like this. You can't even erect a chart for it unless you have fancy, technology with your computer program that will give you positions on the moon, which I don't have. But that's why Uranus challenges us to innovate and develop and to modernize. But anyway, I digress. the point is that we have the long distance breakthrough to the moon. Oops, there we go again. Can I back up? Ah, crap. Um, Let me just go real quick to get this back. Um, okay, so, and then the other thing I wanted to mention about it is the sun itself back for this event was in Cancer, of course, the sign that is associated with the moon. So, and Uranus is um, loosely sextile the sun as well, going on here. So that's all pretty interesting, at least to me. Okay, we talked about Princess Diana and her natal chart. What about when she died, which I believe was August 31st, if I'm not mistaken, 1997? And I just saw in the news that there was something with Meghan and Harry also in some big paparazzi car chase. So here we have a return of that. Um, I'm not prepared to talk about that event, but I just noticed it in the news. Um, but anyway, what makes this pretty interesting is here's Uranus for the trauma on that day. And check this out. Remember Princess Diana's natal chart? And she had Uranus in connected in with moon stuff. Well, here we are again. Uranus connected in with moon and making a T square with violent, bloody Mars and Scorpio. So here's the emotional trauma that she has in her chart, unfortunately connected in with violence and blood and Scorpio intensity and that tragedy. It's heartbreaking, but everything does get reflected astrologically, and we can study anything. And that's what was going on at the time of her tragic crash, which just in general, Uranus Mars can go with crashes. And then you throw in a Leo moon, and you kind of sounds like a princess, doesn't it? The crash Uranus Mars of the princess, reflecting her own natal chart. Okay, we're going to shift gears and talk about Uranus cycles for a few minutes. So 84-year orbit around the sun. And what I like about that is that of all of the planetary cycles, the Uranus cycle is closest to the human lifespan. The average lifespan, at least now, is around like 78 years. But that is taking into consideration everyone who dies of whatever issues, violence, suicide, war. You know, you've got scores of people, you know, young men dying in wars, you know, 18 to 20, whatever. But people who don't unfortunately die, like Princess Diana or others, people who live a natural death, a natural lifespan, their death is more um, in the 80s than the 70s. The natural lifespan, which is probably increasing, but I would say that 84 years or so would probably be the most consistent with the human lifespan out of any planetary cycle. Um, and so that means that if you live a full life, then Uranus transits your natal chart one time. It visits everything just once in a lifetime transits. So it visits every planet, every sign, and every house one time. And it's the only planet that will visit every area of the chart for a prolonged duration. Because Neptune and Pluto have such longer orbits, it doesn't get to every house. And Saturn or even Chiron are quicker, so they don't have a prolonged visit. Maybe Chiron to some degree, but certainly Saturn doesn't. Saturn's only 2.5 years on average per sign or house. But Uranus spends 7 years in every sign or house, and that's definitely a pretty long period of time, 7 years. So it's unique in that way. The only planet to have a prolonged visit to every house in your chart, which is pretty interesting. Um, Now, of particular note is the fourth harmonic aspects that Uranus makes to its natal position. Um, at the first Uranus square, roughly from 19 to 22, that's when we grow up and go to college and individuate from the home. There we go again with the thing jumping, but I'm going to get it back quickly. Uh, okay. Oops. Okay. So I'll get my hands off the keyboard. Um, and so we establish our identity on our own terms at the first Uranus square. Then we've got the Uranus opposition in the early 40s, which correlates with the so called midlife crisis and a period of individuation at that time. Then we've got the waning Uranus square to its natal position. And there is more or less the passage into the senior years, retirement, 65 historically at this one. And then we just talked about the Uranus 84 year, the return, the life review. And what I found, and I think Richard Tarnas mentions this in his book, is that a lot of notable people write their memoirs, their life review, their grand kind of summation of what their incarnation was about at the Uranus return. Both, I believe, Freud and Jung both published their memoirs, um, their final summation thoughts at their Uranus returns. I think that's what Tarnas was saying. I could be wrong on that, but many others have done it too. But again, I haven't given this talk in many years, but I think that's accurate. Okay. So collective trends, the cycles of the outer planets, Jupiter through Pluto, they do correlate with collective trends, lessons, themes, the zeitgeist, spirit of the times. Um, and so Uranus, Jupiter cycle, Uranus, Saturn, all of this is detailed in the book. Then Uranus, Neptune cycle, um, Uranus, Pluto had a conjunction in the 60s. Um, in the 1960s. So it partners with all of these other planets. And so um, I think what I'd like to do is, in interest of time, I've got some other charts that I want to talk about. I think I'm going to skip some of this, and we're going to go to some other charts. Or am I wrong? Oh, I am wrong. We already did those are the charts, the Hiroshima. Okay, no, we're going to stay on it then. I'm sorry. Um, yeah, let's finish with this content. Uh, yeah, we're about an hour in. Yeah, this will be about another 15 minutes and then we'll wrap up. Okay, that's what we'll do. So, okay, so let's go back to this then. Okay, so I like to talk about Uranus being in the middle of the action. It holds a unique position in these collective trends because Uranus is positioned right in the middle of the social planets, Jupiter and Saturn, and the other transpersonal planets, Neptune, Pluto. So you got 5 planets: Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Uranus is in the middle of the collective and the transpersonal or the outer planets. So the Uranus, Jupiter, and Uranus, Saturn cycle with the social planets, those are relatively quick compared to the others. And because Saturn is much more about the manifest world, they tend to bring Uranian impulses into manifestation, and events that are more biographical and notable tend to happen when Uranus is teaming with Saturn or Jupiter because they are part of more of the relative world, the Saturnian world. Whereas Uranus Neptune and Uranus Pluto cycles are slower, more transpersonal, more subtle. I like to say more like background music. The music sets a particular tone, but it operates more on subconscious levels. and it just kind of, marks a whole period of history. Like the flavor of the 1960s was Uranus Pluto. It just was the air. Something's in the air, and it influenced everything, but it was a lot more of that subtle, just pervasiveness, rather than some major event with Jupiter or Saturn. But the interplay with the trigger planets will catalyze those transpersonal or outer cycles. Um, so they're always interacting with Mars or Venus or Mercury, like we saw in all those charts. But just in isolation, it does go with that background music. So let's focus on the Uranus Pluto cycle, which was going on, the conjunction in the 60s. And then when I wrote this book, came out in 2008, part of the reason why, because we were at the Uranus Pluto square during that time. We had 7 exact hits of the Uranus Pluto square between like 2012 to 2015. So at this point in 2008, it was applying. And that's why I wanted to write the book, because we were gearing up for the Uranus Pluto squares. It was tightening, it was coming into manifestation. So the Uranus Pluto combination is most involved with catalyzing radical or intense collective growth. When these slow moving and uncompromising planets interact, their urgency is palpable. With the broadest of reach, we're integrating reform with survival, results in dramatic advances, but also exposing unconsciousness, subversive forces that might limit progress or survival. So, how are we going to boldly have to deal with urgent issues for our collective continuation of some way? So, this is a very dramatic, very intense cycle that you can study. So let's go through some of these things. Because the Uranus Pluto is so dramatic. So roughly speaking, there was a conjunction way back in the mid 1800s, 1847 roughly to 1854. I think that's using about a 10-degree conjunction. And at this time, we had European revolutions, the Seneca Falls Convention for Women's Rights, which was a big deal at the time. The first medical school for women opens in Boston. Queens College for Women founded. The Taiping Rebellion. Steel production was a big deal, a big innovation at this time, which totally radically changed the tenor of society and architecture and transportation systems and whatnot. The first telegraph cables were laid. The Studebaker Brothers Wagon Company was established. Transportation innovations, and even the meteorological organization is established. And that can go with Uranus, with things that are more up there in the sky. Then go forward, and you got the square later on in the 19th century, 1874 to 1880. And then you'll see the same themes. This is why I'm doing this, is you'll notice at Uranus, Pluto, other aspects. We had the conjunction, we're doing the square, we're going to get to the opposition. We see a repetition of different collective Uranian developments going to another level as the cycle goes around. So here we have the first horse-drawn carriage debuts. And then the transportation, and then you got women's rights. The first sorority is during this time. Civil rights, more of promoting equality, and that prohibited discrimination in public accommodations. The Theosophical Societies founded. And then, of course, during this time, we had a lot of conflict between the U.S. and the Native Americans. So a lot of Indian wars were going on then. including, Custer, Little Bighorn. Alexander Graham Bell invents the telephone at this time. We've got transportation again, the Transcontinental Express Railroad debuts. Um, the microphone is invented. Then you have like strikes, public demonstrations, rebellions. You had the Great Railroad Strike, and even Edison invented the phonograph during this time. And then you go forward to the opposition, which was the turn of the 20th century. And this is when the Wright brothers fly, mass production of the automobile. So we see a big theme of transportation. Just Uranian events go with transportation developments, breakthroughs with how we get around. Phonographs then proliferate. So they were invented at the previous one, and then they proliferate and they become part of society as the 20th century dawns. People are using that. Movies become invented. Einstein puts out his theory of special relativity, which I mentioned before. One of the most important philosophical understandings for us to integrate. Many don't, but it's there for us to pay attention if we want. I also thought that War of the Worlds was at this time, and here you have the invasion from the sky, of chaos, of the unforeseen, and oh my god, and public hysteria, that kind of thing. The Boxer Rebellion, the first Zeppelin flight, the Metro debuts in France, the birth of quantum physics, oil discovered in Texas. Roosevelt invites Booker T. Washington to the White House, more developments of racial equality. Radio signal, again, we see all these same things, all these Uranian technology connecting the world together through radio, through phonographs, through cars, because Uranus can go with interconnectedness. And all of these things are bringing everything together, even bringing people together, as we're talking about, even subways bringing people together. So it's a pretty interesting kind of theme that builds, and let's keep going. Then we got the waning square in the more or less from the stock market crash in 29 through much of the 30s in the Great Depression. And this time is noted for the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, but it also did have movies, TV, radar, LP records, intercontinental radio, and aviation all enter mass culture during this time. So all these developments that we talked about before then proliferate and become part of society at the next kind of station point of the Uranus Pluto. And then the disruption and the chaos of the stock market. We talked about the Great Depression, the New Deal, Roosevelt, progressive reform, the collapse of the League of Nations, Hitler, Gandhi, Mao, Mussolini, Roosevelt, Churchill, all of these big figures that were involved with massive collective change and events during the Uranus Pluto square at this time. And then we got the first woman in the Senate, Prohibition ends, the Hindenburg disaster, Brave New World, which is incredibly Uranian about a dystopian society. Relativity is accepted. So Einstein put it forth at the opposition, and then they had the verification, I believe, with the science of an eclipse, which validated. There we go again. It jumped. Validated Einstein's theory. The neutron was discovered. The basis for nuclear weaponry was understood at this time. And then even stress recognized as a health condition, which is trauma, all of this change, all of this disruption. Stress can go with Uranus. That was recognized at this time. And can you imagine, this is, where stress isn't recognized as a health condition? That's only been like less than 100 years or around 100 years. That's kind of puts things in perspective. Well, that's the way it was. Then the conjunction again. Here we go in the 60s. What happened then? Well, many things, and this list is rather short for convenience and time's sake. There's hundreds of things that we can put on this list, but amongst some of the more notable, in Africa, 32 countries gained independence from the European colonial rulers. Freedom, liberation. We had assassinations like Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, social political movements, anti-war demonstrations, civil rights, feminism, taking it to the next level. Uh, China's Cultural Revolution, Eastern European demonstrating against communism, Arab-Israeli conflicts, Bay of Pigs, missile crisis, revolution in music and culture, and Woodstock. Everything was just coming out of Pandora's box in the 60s. Then you had technology, space exploration, landed on the moon, revolution in automobiles. They changed dramatically in the 60s that resemble more of what we know as modern automobiles. That happened in the 60s because before then, think back to Henry Ford and the Model T and the early version of cars that were big boxes. Now in the 60s, cars really became much, much more. In the 50s, you had that too, but they really shifted to what we drive more or less since then in the 60s. Birth control pill is 1961. Satellites, video games, touch tone telephones, computers, tape recorders, ATMs, and the early precursor to the internet all were developed at the Uranus Pluto conjunction. Massive social, cultural modernization. Then the Uranus Pluto square. When I did this talk, it was developing. And part of the talk was, what do you think is going to happen? Speculation. We could go back now and look at what did unfold. I didn't really prepare that for this talk too much, but for your own, reflection, how did that go? Uranus was in Aries, and Pluto was in Capricorn, and during the Uranus-Pluto square, from peaking around 2012 to 15, you had the Tea Party, you had the opposition to Obama's administration. You had a real kind of emergence of a red-blue divide that was much more intense and divisive, and leading to what we have today with Trump. This was building at that time. In fact, a waxing is building of intensity as well. So that's basically what I got. I did some speculation. Okay, let's look at what my speculation was in 2008 when I did this talk. I was speculating that in social political ways, we'll have a reorganization from the dominant power structure, which is generally white, male, wealthy, Christian, heterosexual, maybe new groups demanding equality, such as homosexuals, Hispanics, non-Christians, and seniors. That happened. Adaptation to demographic shifts. Yeah, we were talking a lot about the awareness that in the United States, at least, that non-English speaking people are going to eventually be a majority. And that became much more of the awareness. And then the backlash against that with racism and xenophobia, which sprouted with Trump. Awareness of global overpopulation. Yeah, that's happened too. And the depletion of resources. A battle between the haves and have-nots. Yeah, that's happened too with wealth inequality and the protection of that. Healthcare reform, that ongoing and certainly is an issue. Immigration issues, certainly, and shifting political parties, kind of. That was beginning, like we said, Tea Party and some other things that really changed the nature, which now today, the political parties are a little bit different than what they were before. They become a lot more polarized. There's a little bit less middle ground than there was before. Economic unrest could be part of Uranus Pluto. Tax policy I was talking about. Reform of business, housing industries, global markets. the awareness of the scarcity of resources, price fluctuation. Yeah, I think those things did happen. I'm no economic guy, and that's not my area, but we did have a lot of these things during that time. And then potential disasters and calamities, war, famine, pandemic, disease, climate catastrophes, nukes. Um, there was some degree of instability, and certainly the climate crisis became a lot more pronounced and a lot more airtime around climate change. Certainly happened at this time. Uh, and then cultural, like in the 60s, perhaps more iconic works, culture more authentic and urgent, technology upsurge. Yeah, during the Uranus Pluto square, people got on Facebook, people carried their smartphones and gadgets and all of these iPhones and developments of new um, gadgetry happened during the Uranus Pluto square that peaked from 12 to 15. Um, so that's fun to kind of look back at that. I think that's the end of the presentation. Oh, no, a couple more things. Um, I speculate about the metaphysical, the cosmic, our relationship to universe changing in some way. Maybe, who knows, contact with other life, which is interesting. It wasn't during 12 to 15, but within the last year or two, there's been all this release of UFO stuff, and it's kind of understood. Yeah, there's a lot of funky stuff out there with unexplained phenomena, and it happens so much that the government can't really pretend it doesn't happen anymore, because it's pretty regular that stuff happens that we can't explain like that. So there's a few other things that I mentioned um, on here. I was wondering about the end of the gas guzzling car. That didn't happen, but we have had a lot of green technology, um, and the electric car certainly became more prominent. And then things with Uranus go with the unknown. We just don't know. You can't predict. Uranus is the unpredictable, the wild card. So that's always a part of this archetype, and something I wanted to end with, because it's silly to try to speculate or predict with Uranus, because it's about the unknown, it's about the unseen, it's about things that have not come into our awareness yet. So we can only speculate, we can only wait and see what these things are going to be. Is part of the spirit of Uranus, which is why I like it so much. It's like, what are the surprises that are going to come? What's next? You know, who knows? So people who like constancy and order and stability, well, when Uranus comes to town, that tends to be disrupted. So that's the presentation. Um, and I guess we are done here. I'm going to stop sharing, and right around time. We've talked, I guess, for 75 minutes, which is exactly what I said I'd do. And it turned into pretty much 75 minutes. So there you have it. Thank you, Sue and Robin, for having me do this talk. And I guess, what do we do now? Is there comments, questions?
I have a comment. Eric, you never cease to amaze me. Your ability to pull all of this together and to speak intelligently about it is just blows my mind.
Well, I'm a Uranian, of
I,
course.
I know you are.
So now I
Yeah.
love this planet, and I love it so much. And the thing that, of course, I talk about all the time, and it's my gig, because I don't see that much in astrology, and Uranus goes with astrology, in my view.
Oh yeah.
Astrology is Uranian,
Yes.
but it why is it not as discussed? And I have a theory on it, of
What's that?
why astrologers don't talk about Uranus so much.
What's that?
Because astrology, the way we've inherited, is far more Saturnian. And I have learned that astrologers are more Saturnian as a group than Uranian. And there's much more focus on the tradition, on things that are orderly, on trying to predict things or having things be neat and more classical, than into all of this kind of disruption and
Hmm.
the unknown, and things that are messy or things that break tradition. Um, to honestly, it's been one of the biggest shocks of my entire life of how conservative and Saturnian many astrologers, if not most, are. So
Yeah,
it's not talked about. And me, I have become more and more of an outsider and on the fringe talking about Uranus, which makes sense with the freaking archetype,
right.
right?
Yeah, I never
So
Absolutely.
thought of it that way.
yeah,
Yeah. And you know, the other thing that the one thing that always comes back to me is the unseen. You know, the stuff that's you just can't put your finger on it. And you know, all these Saturnian types want to put their finger on it. They want to, you know, this is the way it is.
yeah, people like to have things be neat and orderly, and that's an egoic need. But Uranus is the biggest challenge to the ego and its need for security and order and preservation. And so Uranus is, an energy that is uncomfortable for most people. And I think that's the main reason why it is marginalized. But here we go with Uranus Pluto trine that is now developing, and Pluto going to Aquarius and Uranus going to Gemini. And I have been waiting for years. I got into astrology in the mid 1990s, and I've been waiting for the mid to late 2020s for almost 25, 30 years, because it's going to be a massively progressive Uranian time frame that we're about to go into, because with Pluto in Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini, you have and trine, you're going to have more and more people kind of open and get other perspectives and paradigms and multidimensional thing. Like I'm going to be doing heliocentric astrology. That's going to be popular with that trine, which it wasn't before. Or other things that are expanding the mind to other perspectives and dimensions is going to be the norm, which
Yeah, and wanting to
none,
break away from those old structured
right.
belief forms that we've had in the past. So,
Exactly, Robin. And so with Pluto in Capricorn for all of these years, which this talk was delivered in 2008, the year Pluto went into Capricorn. And I think I remember saying, for when I did this initial talk at UAC, and I said, okay, Pluto's in Capricorn, it's going to be there for like 16, 17 years, but wait till Pluto gets to Aquarius around 2023, 2024, and we're going to have a very different world in the mid to late 2020s. And I've been waiting, and I've been patient. And now, to speak for all Uranians, now it's going to be our time, folks. So, so buckle up, and people are going to start getting it more.
Yeah.
And there's going to
you're gonna
be
have no choice.
less entrenchment in the past and a lot more embracing of future and multidimensional possibilities is about to come. And I'm starting to see it, and more people are getting it. And I couldn't be more excited about that.
Yay. Well, thank you. As always, a great pleasure to have you, and you're always welcome back.
Yes,
Well,
and
thank
thank
you.
you for the positive outlook on Uranus.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, I fringe when I hear people use positive or negative with anything to do with astrology, because to me all of it's neutral, and no astrology is necessarily going to manifest in positive or negative ways. It's what we do with it. So I'm hoping that I actually was able to give voice to more of the shadow and the disruption and the difficulty, as well as just the potential, because all of it, the whole spectrum is going to be there.
Yeah, the observation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anything to say
the
about?
authoritarian revolution Christina was asking about.
Well,
Uh,
that's the transition we're in between Pluto and Capricorn to Pluto and Aquarius. And we're going to have lots of things in this transition. In this, it's about a 20-month window from when Pluto got to Aquarius in May of 23 or March of 23 to when it enters fully November 24. There's 20 months. We're in that window right now, which is the transition. And this is where we're going to see a lot of this tension between the past and the future. Um, Even with Trump and Biden, here's these guys who are ancient, and most people like, why are we going to vote for another 80-year-old? this 10, why can't we have new leadership? Why can't we have like some 48-year-old, become our president, like Kennedy or something like that, So we see this restless, kind of urgency for change and revolution, and we got to deal with the old guard still and the patriarchy and the Trump thing. And so authoritarian stuff, that's the last, I think Rick Levine or maybe others too said the last stand of the dinosaurs.
Mhm.
Pluto and Capricorn, this is it. We're going to have it until November 2024, a year and a half more to go from the time of this recording. But then once we get there, we've got Uranus fully in Aquarius for 20 years, almost like 19 years and whatever it is. It's like, so, and then Pluto goes to Pisces after that, the other transpersonal sign. So for many people, the rest of our lives, Pluto will be in the transpersonal signs of Aquarius and Pisces. So the transpersonal is definitely set to be amplified with Pluto and Aquarius and then Pisces. So we're going to live in interesting times.
Yay! We asked for it, we got it.
It will be there. But the authoritarian stuff, this is the last gasp of Pluto and Capricorn.
Yeah, and and I just saw something. They're bringing up about a third party, and whether it would be a spoiler or or whether it would get rid of the old farts.
I think that it's almost guaranteed that this next presidential election is not going to be just the choice of two candidates, especially if it's Biden Trump. But I don't think it's going to be Trump. And here I am saying this. It's going to be on YouTube, and people are going to look at it years to come. I think that Trump is going to have very, very severe legal problems that are going to prevent him from being a candidate. No matter if he's the more popular choice of the Republican Party, his legal problems are going to be so immense, and that it's not going to be possible in my view. But who knows? But that's
Right?
just the way
Yeah,
that
he is a Uranian.
we'll see.
Right.
But it's already coming down on him at this point of this recording time. He's already been he's been in hot water quite a bit. He's got many, many, many other shoes that are about to drop. So
Yep.
I do think that the next election is going to be unpredictable. It's going to be multiple candidates. It's going to be a battle royale about the future um, of where we're headed in this country.
It's going to be interesting for sure.
And
Eric,
I also think that if Biden is reelected, I don't think he's going to necessarily serve his full term. And I do think, speaking as a Uranian, and speaking of how important the collapse of the patriarchy is, the ultimate thing that the United States needs, and I should say, Uranus, of course, takes expression everywhere, not just the US, but we have a US focus because that's where we are and that's who I am. But it's definitely broader than that, of course. But having the first woman president is very, very, very necessary symbolically for this country's revolution. We had a black president, of course, at the Uranus Pluto Square, Obama. And in order for us to emerge and from patriarchy, it is critical. And I think it's going to happen. I'm not saying it's going to be Kamala Harris. I don't know. But I do think having the first woman president during this next time frame is pretty much guaranteed. And I think the most necessary symbolic event that we need in this country about liberation and modernization. So we'll see what happens.
time will tell.
And we're out of time. So I think that's all we got today. That's all, folks.
That's
Thank
all,
you.
folks. Thank you
Eric.
so much.
Absolutely. My pleasure.